Hello, St. Lukers, and welcome to your week with St. Luke's podcast. As we move into the Advent season, we are taking the opportunity to consider all of the birth narratives in the Gospels, or the lack of birth narratives in this case for the Gospel of Mark. You've got your clergy here. We hope that you are going to be following with us, and we hope that you've already picked up the book Christmas in the Four Gospel Homes, because that is going to be what we are using in worship. We're going to be talking about that. You're going to be seeing kind of a depiction of those homes and those depictions of those homes as they would be modern day. So we're excited. So we're going to kind of jump in and really understand kind of the evolution of the gospel message and who Jesus came to be. So we're going to start with Mark. Okay, a little recap of Mark. Remember, we studied Mark at the very beginning, the first three months of the year. Mm-hmm. We went through Mark chapter at a time, and that's because Mark is the earliest written. It was written sometime between 65 and 72. It is really the composite, I would say, the framework structure of the other synoptic gospels, which are Matthew and Luke. It's the shortest, and because it was the earliest written, it was written to that kind of sort of first community of the church, maybe a generation past the generation of the disciples in the early church, to kind of begin to say, okay, the early disciples are passing away, the stories may be getting lost, and so let's do this. Let's recap what this meant, especially as the communities begin to face persecution. And so let's talk, y'all, because I think I can speak for all four of us, fell in love with Mark probably more than we had before. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was in Mark that we actually talked about the different kinds of Jesus we meet, even more so than we did with Matthew, Luke, and John. So let's talk about the Jesus we met in Mark.
I think all of us will never forget the term rough that EB used us for that. That for Mark's sure. Jesus is rough. So
Pretty
I think
was another word that didn't land as well, but was used a lot. Right.
In the weeds with people, really getting into their lives, gross sometimes, touching them, spitting on them, in their
there
were bodily fluids. It was a lot. It was a lot that we don't, I think, realize or necessarily immediately associate with Jesus.
And since Mark is fast, we were so grateful that Mark was fast, right? Immediately. We can't get through the grossness quick enough.
Right.
Yeah. For those who didn't read Mark, when we say he spit on people, we meant that he got mud and he made mud out of spit. He didn't spit at people.
Yeah. When Melissa was saying that, I was like, I'm so glad that people have context for what we mean when we say Jesus was spitting on people.
Look,
go back in episodes.
It'll just get them to go read the Gospels more. That's what I'm here for.
And his words, he spat some words out at people in Mark.
Sure,
he did spit the words out.
Mm-hmm. That's part of the roughness too. I think we all really like the confrontational.
It wasn't a word that EB gave us, but we used snarky a lot. We got snarky Jesus in Mark for sure.
Because Jesus didn't have time to play around. Jesus was heading towards the cross, and that's the theology of Mark, right? Like it's focused on Jesus. It's focused on Jesus and Jesus' sacrifice. And as we learn in the book, we don't even have time for a birth story because we have to get to the cross.
Right. So perfect. Thank you. Perfect segue. So let's talk about what is the birth story of Mark.
Yeah.
Correct.
Silence. That was it. You just heard it. Yep. We just recapped the entire birth narrative of Mark.
We are such skilled public theologians.
We are.
I thought it was a nuanced kind of way to tell people there was none. There was to add silence. Hey, Jad, I think you have the Bible open to Mark. Can you read the first part of Mark?
Yeah. Chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning of the good news about Jesus Christ, God's Son, happening just as it was written about in the prophecy of Isaiah. So right away, right off the bat, this is where we get the term gospel, right? And the book even actually it makes allusions to that. It tells us that, actually not allusions explicitly, we get the word gospel from the beginning of Mark, good news about Jesus. And that's where Mark begins with this prophecy from Isaiah. Look, I'm sending my messenger before you. He will prepare your way, a voice shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. And then we're introduced to the first character, John.
Right. And so John the Baptist is the herald, because to have a herald means who has been born, but a monarch, right? Because that's the kind of the way it was. And so you get John the Baptist talking about and talk about rough. I mean, it begins with setting up that this person that is coming is going to be rough with John, because, you know, he's a pretty rough character himself. Right. At least I think he is. Y'all agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they give a pretty explicit. They give a description of what he wears and what he eats, and they are all very rough.
Right.
Leather and locusts and
limiting, right?
So just a little bit of honey to sweeten up my locusts, you know?
Yeah, you know. A little
to make them
salty.
thick as they like, oh, gross. Right. So why do you think why is the birth narrative not important to Mark?
You know, Mark's mostly concerned about, if we remember from January and February, Mark's mostly concerned about the crucifixion and resurrection, right? The passion. So Mark wants to set the stage and get there quick.
Mm-hmm. And I would say there's a birth narrative, but not of his physical human birth. The first thing we see of Jesus is his baptism. So that, I think, if we were to argue there is a birth narrative in Mark, it's Jesus' baptism, which is totally different than the other gospels. To think of that as the birth, because it's the beginning of the ministry. So it's, again, Mark says it starts here. This is where it starts to matter, is when he starts to do things, because that's the beginning of that journey to the cross. And that's the phrase that we get, is that Mark is a passion narrative with a really long introduction, right. And that Jesus is headed to the cross from moment one. So
I'd say also, just from a perspective of like his literary style, he's just not interested in convincing you that Jesus had this miraculous birth. You know what I mean? This miraculous birth. He gave you the information as a writer up front that this is Jesus, the Son of God. And I don't need to dig into explaining that. I need to explain the rest of this thing that's actually important to what that'll mean moving forward.
So let me, that's a great kind of, we didn't talk about this much, but is it that the humanity of Jesus is not as important?
I mean, I take it it's the
humanity.
I
stumped. Everyone, you heard it here first. I stumped all the clergy.
Partially because I could argue for you or against you. Like, I could argue that that the fact that we start here is more because his humanity matters more, or because his divinity matters more. Because it depends on what you understand the birth narrative to be about. Is it about the divine, the birth narrative that we think of you know, virgin birth and in a stable and all of that, where you get this intersection of human and divine? So I don't know what is it more about his humanity or his divinity when he's baptized, I guess, would be my question, because I think that would answer that question for me.
Interesting.
I would say, piggybacking off of what you're saying, Melissa, or contributing or adding that thought into what I'm saying, like, I'd say the entire book emphasizes his divinity, because even when we start with the baptism, it's adding on to his humanity that we already realize he has, right? So it's his humanity, and then it's his affirmation from God that he is his son in whom he's well pleased, right?
And this is the one that says this is the one where it's just him and God.
It's very intimate.
So we see this human being, right, being acknowledged by God, and we assume he's given power and he's empowered to go on and do the rest of the things that he does, right? And from there, his crucifixion rests in his divinity, yes, also in his humanity, but we focus on his divinity in this. And so I would say to Mark a little bit, I'd say maybe Mark emphasizes Jesus's divinity above his humanity, and there's not really balance in that hypostatic union in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
Well, to add on to that, what I think is interesting is that earthy grounded Jesus is doing earthy groundy human things that become divine things, like that spit dirt and all that turns into healing. So maybe it's that Mark isn't concerned about how Jesus came about, birth narrative with angels and all this miraculous stuff, but that he was on the ground throughout Mark, ground, gritty, and doing miraculous things through that. So I think there's that continues that conversation of we have both of those things just in how Jesus is depicted in Mark.
With that in consideration, did we talk about when we did our little recap, did we talk about the audience of Mark, like who Mark was writing to?
No, I forgot. Go ahead.
Oh no, I forgot to.
It's a Jewish audience. It's a Jewish audience. And it's interesting because as we're talking about it, I know John was a reaction to the Gnostics, right? This whole understanding of, well, when he went to the cross, it wasn't really the divine, it was just the human because the body is so John is kind of this connection to that. Although John is almost sometimes thought of as a Gnostic gospel, but was Gnosticism going on at this time too? Do you wonder? Is that maybe why it's so gritty and dirty and like so in human form, and then pulling the divine into that? I don't know my history.
I don't know if Gnosticism was like a full-on thing yet, because this is just about 30, 40 years after Jesus' death. But like you said in the beginning of the time together, this is being written because ideas are getting off there and we're getting off of point of who Jesus is. So there may have been a lot of those early inklings of knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And Mark's definitely trying to bring it in together. This is the story of Jesus. So yes. Yeah. Even if it's not established.
Like that historical piece and then the literary pieces, they're just trying to get something down. Like this is the first time someone's just trying to get the basics down. And so it isn't trying to make it flowery. It isn't trying to, so just from the literary side of it, it makes sense for it to be in that way. But to hear what they thought was essential tells you about the historical piece. So it is essential that he is, gritty and in the midst of it, because this would tell you what was most important for the very first Christians to know, because someone was just trying to get you something to share with other people.
Right.
Which
the cross, the fact that someone who is divine would give himself over to the humiliation and grittiness of the cross. And then death is defeated through resurrection is the most important for them. Yeah, that really did happen, that he wasn't stolen, that it wasn't because that's what we have is that this idea that, tell him that the authority stole him, don't let him be resurrected kind of.
Yeah. The other contextual thing that's happening, that is in 66, there was the Jewish war where there's more conflict happening, and that area, Palestine, is becoming a problem for Rome and the powers that be. And then you're seeing that first generation or second generation beginning to split themselves away from Judaism. And so Mark's got to establish this. Sorry, just another contextual piece.
Thank you. No, that's a good historical reference for us too. So before we get into that last question that we wanted to talk about, let's move into this sermon series and this book and what it does about kind of understanding, presenting what would Mark's house look like at Christmas. Because we're in the season where we're decorating our homes and we get into all the, what does it really mean? And what does that have to do with, celebrating the incarnation? So Melissa, take it away. Tell us about what this book talks about. What would Mark's house look like at Christmas?
Yeah. So I want to just give attribution where it's due. This is a book by Cynthia Campbell, and this was for a church that she worked with and an artist in her church, Kevin Burns. As they thought through this, the artist then did depictions of the outside of these houses of what they would look like. And so if you were to talk about what Christmas at Mark's house would look like, that's what kind of each chapter is about. What is Christmas at Mark's house, Matthew's house, Luke's house, and John's house look like, with the idea of what are our birth narratives? What do birth narratives look like in each of these stories? And so I'm going to read just the beginning of the book. It says, we begin by going to visit cousin Mark. He lives in a spare, simple home because Mark is just kind of like the police detective who says just the facts. His house has just what it needs and not much more. A door, a couple of windows, a chimney, and the surprising thing, there isn't much in the way of Christmas going on here. So it's funny because when we were talking about doing this series, and you'll see a lot of how we've kind of put this together when you come to worship Sunday. Can't wait to see you. But to ask that question of what does this look like, there was some struggle of starting with Mark because it's bland. It isn't what we see as Christmas. It isn't, if you think of what Christmas would look like, Mark does not have Christmas decorations. There just aren't any, because there isn't this understanding of Christmas in the truest sense, in what our truest sense would be if we just heard the word Christmas. You could walk into Mark's house and have no clue that it was Christmas, because there aren't decorations. Because, as we have just talked about, in Mark's gospel, there is no Christmas story. There is no birth narrative in that traditional sense. So that's this idea. It's almost like a cabin in the woods kind of a feel for Mark's house. So what do you all think that kind of shows us in this depiction?
First, it gives license to everyone who doesn't want to decorate.
Or is it behind? I'm just feeling a little Markian these last 3 weeks.
You can just say, why didn't you decorate for Christmas? Well, I'm celebrating Mark's Christmas.
Exactly. Right. Like observing a holy Lent, you're observing a holy Advent.
Exactly.
Right. I'm just eating locusts and honey. And that's
I'm
all.
going with the rough. I'm going with a rough Christmas this year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, but seriously.
But what does this picture help you do? Why does it matter that we start with Mark this season? What actual Christmas, what does it do for our Christmas, for our Advent journey to think about Mark's house at Christmas?
Just continuing the thread that Jen started, I think that it could call us into a season of reconnection with the heart of Advent. I think that all of the decorations and things and the traditions and all that kind of stuff is amazing. It's part of why the Advent season and Christmas are my favorite time of year, but they can serve to be a bit of a distraction. There's like we talk about Advent and it being a season of anticipation and preparation. And then we think about being children leading up to the 25th and you're just so excited about, but there's so many things to look forward that we fulfill that anticipation with on the way to the 25th. You know what I mean? Whether it's the carols or it's the cookies or it's whatever, there's this and that. But if we strip those things away and we only have what's necessary, if we only have the story, right? What does that do for our journey if we don't distract ourselves with those things? What kind of space do we create for contemplation in our own hearts and minds? If we don't distract ourselves with all the cool things that come on the way to the birth or on the way to Christmas morning,
I love that, Jeremy, because I think you're right in that we've forgotten what the Advent season really is. In studying the liturgical season, I had to learn for myself, and we shy away from it as pastors. I'm going to say this. I shy away from it. The lectionary is usually John the Baptist. It's usually preparing for the second coming. It is exactly what the beginning of Mark is, the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Like, it is Advent and Lent are the same seasons, a time of personal penitence, self-reflection. Lent is preparing and being penitent and sitting in our self-examination of the disciplines for the cross and the necessity of Holy Week to get to resurrection. But Advent is preparing ourselves for the second coming of the incarnation of Christ coming again. And are we ready? And all of those John the Baptist liturgical are very Markan, like cut away, prepare the wilderness. When I think of preparing the wilderness, I think of like moving rocks and trees and gardening and landscaping, barriers and and the other gospel John the Baptist readings are even more. It's like the lectionary readings usually for Advent are like, the darkness is coming and there will be a day and the moon and the sun, and they're very apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to forget that that's actually the work of Advent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or even like the other book we're doing as a devotion for Advent, Honest Advent, it wants to center the journey of Advent around the journey of pregnancy and birth. You know what I mean? So what happens if we focus on Mary and her journey as a person bringing life into the world? That's not really, it's hard. You know what I mean? It's difficult and there's joy to look forward to. But yeah,
Yeah. So, and another piece. Go ahead.
Pregnancy is fun when you're having the showers and you're getting the nursery ready. And those last 4 weeks when everything's done and you're in pain, it's miserable. I speak for all. I don't speak for all, but I speak for all my births. Let's just put it that way. You sit and you wait and you think, am I ready for this? And can I do this? And what way my life is going to change? And have I done enough? And will I screw this kid up? And yeah, at least that was me.
No, as a father, I can relate to that. Preparing. Yeah. And I was going to say the other aspect that's kind of just, it maybe sometimes is obvious, but we can pass through, is that we have 4 different voices. We have 4 different perspectives. We have 4 different forms of architecture in the neighborhood. We've got 4 different expressions of perspectives on Jesus, and having Mark is part of that, and the beauty of the plurality of voices and perspectives that sometimes we just kind of forget, especially with Christmas and how the world has kind of woven the narratives into one, especially Matthew and Luke, but that Mark is there too, and it's of great value. It does something different, but it's part of that chorus, the plurality of authorship. So I think it can kind of be an obvious one, but I think sometimes it's important to just label again, because we've been doing this all year. We've been in all 4 gospels all year. That plurality of voices and perspective is beautiful. And even though it's a shack kind of feel, it still has great value. It brings warmth, and it is telling a story and leading us somewhere.
I think for me, my one sentence is Mark reminds us the baby grows up. And that when we have all of this pomp and circumstance around this birth, the hard work there's still hard work to do. I mean, Jen and Jad, y'all have had kids. I imagine that you think, labor and pregnancy, that was really hard. But then the kids keep growing, and you think, oh, maybe the next season I'll get, I've worked with all ages well enough to have seen, like, it doesn't necessarily get easier. It's different. Right. Jen's face with her all almost adult kids right now.
I realize now why Jesus died at 33.
Mary didn't kill him.
Jen wasn't formed until 26.
I was about to say, Mary didn't kill him.
No, she wasn't Mary. She did the best she could.
Sorry, you were being very serious and real.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
I had an epiphany about Lent. Okay.
but that is like it's we like Christmas. We like
Yeah.
We like the peaceful baby. There, it was not peaceful. It was a manger. But we like our pictures of the peaceful baby in the manger. Well, this peaceful baby grows up to be a really rough leader as far as Mark is concerned. But a rough person to come and be with us in our roughness. Because I'm not sure that a baby in a manger is who I want to be with me in my hardest times. I think it is this Jesus I want to sit down with me and go, okay, here's the deal. Like, I know it sucks. This is hard. And we're going to do it together because look where I'm going. Surely you can take whatever that next step is. So, and y'all will see a little bit of how we are doing that with the way we're telling the story in worship this week too. But not losing the magic of Christmas, not ignoring it or moving on too quickly from it, but not forgetting that Christmas is the beginning of something, that Advent is the beginning of our liturgical year. And that the question at Christmas, because we feel like when we hit that Christmas day that we've finished something. That's the way that particularly here in Orlando, where everything is commercial Christmas, right? Once the Christmas parties at Disney stop, once Grinchmas stops, once, we aren't seeing all of the lights and everything around us, we feel like something has come to an end. But I think Mark invites us to ask at Christmas what comes next.
Well, and so I would say, it's the waiting, it's the learning to wait, it's the learning to sit in the midst of an empty house or an empty spiritual house and wait and long for hope, because that's what Mark's gospel really points us towards from the beginning, is hope. And there's a question in the book that you all will be able to kind of wrestle with yourself, but it says the author tells us that hope is to be found in the manger only because it is first found in the cross. So I wonder if the Christmas decoration that Mark does has is a cross, cross at the center of an Advent wreath.
Yeah.
And that's the image, that the wooden cross, was the end of the manger, right? So what do you make of that? How does that bring you hope?
Stumped us again.
Dang.
I mean, for me, it's what I just said of knowing that there is more past this, that that my Savior doesn't stay a baby, if that makes sense. And that there is someone who not only came to be with me, but will walk the same journey as I do. And so seeing what that baby will become is so much of the hope at Christmas in that way.
Yeah, it's growing and going somewhere, right? The narrative, and that there's something even more miraculous and beautiful in front of us.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of rests honestly in what Melissa was saying earlier, just in the fact that, I have a Savior. I am connected in relationship with a Savior that will go into the dark and hard and gritty and messy places. And I don't need to be pristine and clean to be in relationship with this Jesus who spits in mud and who is even rough with his words. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And that the decorations don't have to cover all that up. They can all sit together. They can sit together.
Right.
All right. Well, we hope that you continue to follow along with us. We hope you'll pick up the book. We also have the daily devotion that's happening, as Jeremy talked about, the Advent hours, right? Is that how?
Honest Advent.
Honest Advent, excuse me. And so read along with us, and we hope to see you in worship this Sunday. I know it's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Right. But we're going to be in worship. We're going to be combined at 9:30 and combined at 11:15. And we have a special guest with us, Bishop Ken Carter, our bishop here in Florida, in the Florida Conference. He has one more month as our bishop, and he is starting kind of his farewell journey at St. Luke's to preside with us over communion table, and also to share a special word of gratitude. And so I hope you'll come. You'll be with us. It's going to be a beautiful celebration. And we will see you then. Until then, God's blessings.